Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Let me be clear. He is clearly disappointed with many NATO allies, and I understand his point. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said in an interview following his closed-door meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. And according to the Wall Street Journal, President Trump is exploring plans to reposition U.S. troops away from certain NATO countries he considers unhelpful and redeploy them to nations viewed as more supportive, such as Poland, Romania, and Greece. Now, meanwhile, U.S. Republican leaders continue to stress that a strong NATO remains essential to counter global threats. We now analyze the aftermath of the meeting with Jacek Raubo, Director of Analysis Unit at Defense 24. Good to have you with us.
Hello, and thank you for having me here.
All right, so let's jump right in from this tense meeting. I want to begin with very much from the thing we just cited from the Wall Street Journal of punishing those countries in NATO that didn't help him, unhelpful countries. Is this just another piece of political theater? Is there serious threats to this? How realistic is him repositioning U.S. troops?
I think we are struggling right now with two different fields. The first one is, of course, covered by emotions and also political issues. And typical Donald Trump narratives. Here, I think U.S. will make kind of examples for mostly Spain and maybe other states where we saw a kind of a rejection to U.S. support, maybe not only to Epic Fury, but to U.S. actions in CENTCOM area of responsibility. So this is the first layer. Second layer is something more practical. U.S. need to refresh their approach to European area of responsibility. Why? Mostly because, as we are very easy to see, Eastern flank need to have a better U.S. construction, U.S. architecture of forces. And that's why I think Donald Trump can very effectively use this kind of typical planning issues to strengthen the voice coming aftermath after this Epic Fury issue. So I think we have a synergy of two different topics, but it will be a very fruitful, I think. Maybe it's a very unpopular thing, but it might be a very fruitful for Eastern flank and also for the Nordic flank and Southern Europe.
Mm-hmm. You're saying it might be fruitful, as you said, this will mean that more U.S. troops potentially in Poland, but at the same time, as you said previously, more bases, but it does seem
more infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. But it does seem it comes out of an emotional decision. Now, I think emotional decisions when it comes to security, that doesn't sound very well. I want to tie that in with what Secretary General Rutte said as well with that meeting, and he said very much that he understands that Trump is clearly disappointed with NATO allies, and I understand his point. Why is he still being so understanding of President Trump? He always has been. Is there another strategy behind this?
I suppose Secretary General is trying to balance emotions between both sides, between U.S. and other NATO allies. And he need to use atypical narratives which are connected with White House atmosphere. And therefore, it is visible that Rutte is trying to accept some of U.S. arguments in the context of the present situation. So I think it is also a very diplomatic format, hopefully effective in the context of U.S. administration right now. So I think this is the part of diplomacy. This is the part of long-term strategy to balance emotions. They are visible on both sides. Some European states are right now with a very aggressive posture against Donald Trump and also they are using this NATO issue in their political agenda. On the other hand, U.S. is doing the same thing because they are under pressure with epic fury background. And I think in long term, we will see some better consensus that NATO need to rebuild, for instance, this European pillar. And on the other hand, U.S. need to change their posture in Europe. And I think we will see very soon some examples of that, because NATO and mostly U.S. They are preparing for SWORD 26 exercises, which can be very effective in changing this European defense initiative format. So I think emotions are good in media, in policy, but when we think about military, there are so many good examples of cooperation between both sides that I'm maybe not optimist. I'm very pragmatic in making this assessment about the situation between the transatlantic partners.
Okay, let's talk about that pragmatism for a moment as well. This has also come out. I mean, it's not only President Trump who has a say here, it's also the Republicans. And in fact, the Republican head of the House of Armed Services Committee said in a statement that, paraphrasing here, that NATO remains firmly in U.S. interests against those threats faced by Beijing, Pyongyang, you name it. So having this come from a committee that very much it's about oversight, I mean, these are appropriate also in terms of money, policy at large extent. Those are Republicans saying this. How do you interpret that? And does this, let's say, calm the emotions, as you will? Is this a good signal in terms of the U.S. and NATO?
First of all, a short remark here, because it is, I think, necessary to emphasize one thing. The role of Congress is, I think, stronger than Europe is thinking about it. And in Poland, mostly, we need to strengthen our approach toward the different parties in Congress. That can be a strategy for us when we think about the political goals and military goals. So we need to remember Congress is a very critical point in thinking about U.S. posture around the world. Okay, after that, coming back to your question, I think Republicans and Democrats, they understand that transatlantic cooperation is something not only connected to securing Europe as a place where U.S. need to place their armed forces, their assets. This is something more global. Look on the situation with European partners in Indo-Pacific. In Indo-Pacific, some of the partners from Europe are strengthening their military presence in the context of China, in the context of this rivalry inside this region, which is very crucial for all of the global relations. Therefore, I think think tankers and also analysts and politicians from both sides, they understand very well that without that, will be a single, very not so strong, very weak player. But when we see 32 states congregated in one goal, also built on some kind of values, we are much stronger in this global context. And I think both sides understand that. And always, I'm underlining, we need to balance our emotions, which are constantly bad by some typical politician narratives. So again, when we are coming back to very pragmatic, realistic understanding of the global area, NATO is still a crucial pillar for both sides, for Europe and also for North Atlantic states like US and Canada.
Just brief last question. We mentioned the North Atlantic. This is also something that includes Greenland. This has again been mentioned by President Donald Trump. What do you make of it? Is this going to be again an issue in the next few months?
I think it will be a very interesting issue also. Russia will never stop in directions toward the Arctic, and China would like to play their kind of a new role. Therefore, NATO and partners and cooperation with US and Canada it will be much better when we think about intelligence, when we think about strengthening our military posture there. And I think this situation, this maybe a crisis or crisis situation of Greenland build-up, our approach toward the whole Arctic issues. And I think it is also maybe not good in emotions, in terms, in words we used during that time, but it will be a very effective in some practical actions and assets placed in the context of Arctic security.
All right, so as you said there, balancing those emotions and policy, getting the latest there from what's happening in NATO and the United States. Thank you so much, Jacek Raubo, Director of Analysis Unit at Defense 24. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but as ever, stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.